Popping bottles in the ice, like a blizzard. When we drink, we do it right. Getting slizzard, sipping scissor in my ride, like 3-6. Now I'm feeling so fly, like a G6, like a G6, like a G6. Now I'm feeling so fly, like a G6, like a G6, like a G6. Now I'm feeling so fly, like a G6.
Give me that mo wet, give me that crystal style. Ladies love my style. At my table getting wild. Get them bottles poppin'. We get that drippin', that drop. Now give me 2 more.
Kevin. Karen. And let's say Jim. So here I have 3 values inside of my friends array. So when we're creating a normal access these individual items inside of my program. So inside of this friends list, we're basically storing all of these different values, and that can be really useful. So now that we've stored some values, let's talk about what you can put inside of a list. So you can really put any piece of information in Python. We could put things like strings, numbers, or booleans. So if I wanted, instead of just putting strings here, I could change like one of these to a number, and I could change one of these to a boolean, and it wouldn't matter. Python's going to be fine with that. But let's change these back to strings just for the sake of the example. So now that we've created our list, how can we access individual elements inside of this list? It's a good question. I'm going to go ahead and print something out to the screen. The first thing we can do is we can just print out the actual list. So I can just say print friends, and then when I run this program, if we look down here in the console, you can see it's just printing out the actual list of friends, right? But let's say that I wanted to print out a specific element inside of this list. Well, I can actually refer to elements by their index. So each one of the elements inside of this list has a particular index, and the indexes actually start at 0. So we would say that this first element in the list, Kevin, has an index of 0. We would say that this other element, Karen, has an index of 1, and this third element, Jim, would have an index of 2. So even though Jim is technically the third element inside of the list, it has an index of 2. And that's because we start indexing at index position 1. And so that's just kind of how lists work, and that's how list indexes work. So if I wanted to access a specific element inside of my friends list, I can just refer to it by its index. So over here, after we type out friends, I'm just going to type in open and closed square brackets on my and inside of this, it's just going to print it starts at left side. It's going to be up here. So that can be really useful to monitor lists. In this tutorial, I want to talk to you guys about using functions with lists in Python. Creed, for example, and now I'm like adding in one of the most and then store them, really just a bunch of strings with names in them. So these two lists are invaluable. So because lists so important, there's actually a bunch of different functions that we can use with lists. And those functions allow us to do things like modify the lists and get information about the list. So in this tutorial, I just want to show you a bunch of those functions. We're going to talk about some of the most common and most popular functions that you would use on lists to make them more powerful and make them more easy to use. So the first thing we can do is obviously just print out a list. So down here, I'm printing out this friends list. And when I run my program, you see down here, we're just printing out all the elements in the list. So it's always good to be able to print out all the elements inside of a list. But there's a lot of other functions that we can use. So one function is called the extend function. And the extend function will basically allow you to take a list and append another list onto the end of it. So I could say like friends.extend. And inside of these parentheses, I can pass in the list that I want to add on to the friends list. So I could say like lucky numbers. And now when I print out this friends list, not only is it going to have all the elements in the friends list, it's also going to have all the elements inside the lucky numbers list. You can see down here we have all of our friends, and then we also have the numbers over here. So that's a really easy way to essentially just like add two lists together. We can also just add individual elements onto a list. So I could come down here and I could say friends.append, and this will actually allow me to append another item onto the end of this list. So over here, I could just add another name. So we could say Creed, for example. And now I'm like adding another friend onto the end of this list. So when I run the program, in addition to having the original items that were in the list up here, we also have this additional item at the end. And that append function is always going to add the item onto the end of the list. But let's say that you wanted to add an item into the middle of the list, so like right here or right here. There's another list function called insert. And insert is going to take two parameters. The first parameter is going to be the index where you want to insert the item. So why don't we insert it here at index position 1. I'm just going to say 1, and then I'm going to type in the name of the element that I want to add. So we can just say like Kelly. And now at index position 1, we're going to have the value Kelly, and all of these other values are going to get pushed up. They're going to get pushed to the right one index position. So now when I run the program, you can see we have Kevin, this new element Kelly, and then all the other elements have been pushed off to the right. We can also remove elements. So for example, let's say I wanted to remove this Jim value. All I have to do is just say friends.remove,